We have a 1960 Lotus Elite. In approximately 1,037 were produced from 1958 through 1963. We've been very successful in finding about 780 around the world. You'll always find two types of chassis plates for the early Lotus cars. Cars that were sold to a dealer or a distributor all said Lotus cars. They were actually assembled, completed, and shipped. Cars that say Lotus components on the very same type of chassis plate were all either purchased through the racing division, which was Lotus Engineering, or someone walked up to Lotus itself and said, gee, I'd like to buy one of your cars. These cars were very expensive in 1957, 58, 59, 60. They ran between $4,900 and $5,600, depending upon the fitment or the option. Mm-hmm. You could buy two Porsches, two Corvettes. You could buy some incredible vehicles, an E-Type Jag in 62 for two-thirds of this car. And that's why people were somewhat afraid of Lotus cars in the beginning. A plastic car, a four-cylinder engine from a water pump, fire pump configuration. They didn't know what to make of it. So we've got about 1,037 produced. They're all fiberglass, a very unique construction. Monocoque, like a big eggshell. Very little metal. There's some metal in the front for the front suspension. There's a little bit of metal that comes up the whole door post and wraps around the windscreen and the bar underneath. And that's the only metal in the car. Everything else is secured to the fiberglass with rubber metalastic bushings. It's all polyester laid up except for the doors, because the doors are laid up with epoxy resin. The first 250 cars were done by Maximar. It was a boat company. If anybody knows about doing glass fiber work, it's the boat companies. The next 780 cars were all done by Bristol Aircraft. They were very proud of that. And they put a nice little insignia on their car made by Bristol Aircraft. This is a right-hand drive car. About two-thirds of the cars were right-hand drive. The first 250 cars were all right-hand drive, no exceptions. This was a special equipment car. It does have some unusual benefits. It's got the NACA in the front for additional cooling. I've made some changes over time, simply because it's a driver. Lotus is a relatively inexpensive assembler. They didn't manufacture much, so there were no props for the bonnet. So we put in little walnut pieces of wood, and they hold the bonnet up. This engine is a 1500 as opposed to the originals, which were 1220 cc's. It has a 5-speed gearbox that we created a few years ago. Other than that, it's perfectly stock. 15-inch wire wheels, stainless steel bumpers on the front. The first 580 cars all had one carburetor. The rest of them either had dual SUs or Webers. It was an option. This one has the NACA duct, which will feed cold air directly into the carburetors, be they one carburetor, two SUs, or dual Webers. And it's very efficient. I've road tested this a number of times with thermocouples underneath the bonnet, and I would just tape it off and redrive the same route, and it reduces under bonnet or engine temperature by almost 28 degrees on the same warm day. The Coventry Climax engine covers were all orange-yellow. That was Coventry Climax's. They made forklifts, one of their many items, and that was their corporate colors, like IBM Blue, for example. Wire wheels are all standard, 4-inch wide, 48 spoke, just like on an MG or a Triumph or an Austin Healey. 15 inches in diameter, nothing exotic, because Lotus was still an assembler of cars, not a manufacturer. The rear brakes are all inboard, hanging on the differential. Saves any outboard unsprung weight. Nice gas tanks on the back, nice fillers. For right-hand drive cars and for Europe, they all got amber directional signals. We got white in North America because amber was not legal. We also couldn't use PL700 lamps because we had to have sealed beams. The insides are pretty Spartan. There's not too much to say for the cars. There's no windows except for the pop-out windows, like so. And you can see that they're curved in 2 dimensions, and that's to fit the curvature of the body. So they simply slide in. And they lock in place. So when you want to take the window out, you just pop it out and slide it behind the seat where there's a nice little pocket that Lotus supplied. Dashboard has all of your basic instruments. Tachometer. Speedometer goes to 140 miles an hour. Tachometer goes to 8,000 RPM because the Coventry Climax can easily turn 7,500. Dual oil pressure, water temperature gauge, ammeter, fuel gauge, directional signals, lights, heater, wiper, choke. All the instruments that you would see on a 1950, 1960 car. No radios because there's too much RF interference from the electrics. Mm-hmm. You can have a boombox if you wish to run some tapes. It doesn't seem to interfere with cellular telephones, which I only use when I'm stopped naturally. There are no inherent weaknesses in the car for a couple of reasons. One, the few items that Lotus actually produced themselves, such as the castings for the rear upright. These were race cars in the beginning. The first 17 cars were hand done at Tottenham Lane in England. That was the factory. I walked down there many times to see it. So they let the racing guys make some of the alterations. Everything else was surfaced was supplied by other manufacturers. Triumph uprights, wire wheels from MGAs, gearboxes from MGAs. Coventry Climax engines came complete from Coventry Climax, already done. Differentials were Sprite. So you can see they used already supplied materials and items from other substantial manufacturers. Some are a little bizarre. Door handles from a Hummer van. We don't see too many Hummer vans in North America, but that's where the door handle came from. The side window frames are all done by Lotus. These are brass with chrome on them, so they are unique to Lotus in this case. So are the windscreens, front and rear, again, unique to Lotus. Instruments were pretty much off the shelf, nothing particularly extraordinary. A lot of concessions to racing. For example, the dynamo or generator is a Lucas racing generator because it has ball bearings in the front and ball bearings in the back. Once a car is properly restored, a usual 3,000 mile maintenance, an oil change and an oil filter. There are 18 lube points on these cars, which sounds like a lot, but it takes 20 or 30 minutes. They all get a couple of squirts of grease. We check the fluids, both in the gearbox, the brakes, and the clutch, and in the differential. That's pretty much all that's required. For my cars, before I take them out, I do a couple of things. I check tire pressure, just because these tires have tubes in them, and tubes can leak. So once you've checked tire pressure, which is always a good idea, you'll open the bonnet. Provide with our nice English walnut block here to hold it in place. These particular engines have a small primer pump on the mechanical fuel pump that will prime the float bowls for the carburetors, whether there's 1, 2, or Webers. Then I'll check levels on the dipstick, and it so happens this particular one is down exactly 1/2 of a quart. You can see where my thumb is. There's the low line, there's the high line. Just takes a moment to check for water in your radiator, and again, simple checks for any Lotus car. You can take the time to make sure your fluids for both the clutch and the brake reservoirs are up to levels. That's truly about it in terms of driving the cars. It drives like anything else. It's a little noisy because it is a monocoque. It's like a big eggshell, so there is some drumming and some noise inside. With the proper type of undercoating and sound deadening, you can mitigate quite a bit of that. It adds a few pounds of weight. Actually, it adds about 35 pounds of weight, but it does soften the noise significantly.